Because I've always believed we've learned more from our failures than we actually do from our successes. And if you can overcome failures and learn from them and grow from them, that's the way everything becomes better. I mean, everything you do becomes better. You become a stronger human being. You become a stronger worker. You become a more knowledgeable person. And I truly do believe art is growth.
Good to see you. You look great.
So do you. It's good to see you, Tony. Always good to see you.
Thanks. Thanks, man. So you took over as producing artistic director in 1992.
Yeah, the late 1992. 93 was my first season. Yeah.
And you retired from Barter in 2019.
Correct.
That's 26 years. By the way, I ripped your bio off of the Emery and Henry website, where you are a professor now, right?
Adjunct, yes. I also
Great.
started that program, so I'm the founder of the theater program at Emery and Henry.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't have a theater department before I got here. And then they asked me to come teach a class, an acting class, and the rest kind of was history. They only had an English professor who was kind of like had a drama club and did a couple of shows a year. So they didn't really have, they had no formal theater, really no formal theater program at all.
Is that right?
Yeah. So so the dean and I got together, we formed a theater program.
Prior
Meanwhile,
to that, when did you start teaching there?
I started teaching there, I in my second year at Barter. So it would have been 1994.
Okay, so you have a long history with Emery and Henry.
Now I do. Yeah.
Great. You're a founder of the theater department at a major university in the U.S.
Well, it's now the third or fourth, depending what survey polls you're looking at. It's now either the third or fourth ranked theater department in the Commonwealth of Virginia, and that's going against all of the big universities, William and Mary and UVA and VCU and Virginia Tech and Radford and all those. So it's come a long way.
Well, you kind of have a tendency to start things and grow them really fast, don't you?
That tends to be my. I've always said if you need somebody to just come in and maintain something, I'm not your guy. I'm about starting new programs and making things bigger.
Well, you sure did that at Barter. I know. I worked, as you know, I worked with you for 5 years.
Yeah.
I have a quote, a Richard Rose quote.
Uh-oh.
That I think is apropos. You said in, I think it was VIP Scene magazine, there was an article about you in 2017. You said, one of the most important things we do around here is learn. We have a saying around Barter, art equals growth. I consistently remind us all that we must never stop learning. When we stop learning, we stop living up to our potential as human beings.
Absolutely true. Learning is what it's all about. I will, in hiring people, I always look for two things. Their ability to learn and their work ethic. And the ability to learn sometimes usually came in a question of, tell me your greatest mistakes and what you learned from it, or how you overcame it. That's something people never want to answer in an interview because they're afraid they're going to look bad. But if you press them hard enough, they really do start telling stories about. Because I've always believed we've learned more from our failures than we actually do from our successes. And if you can overcome failures and learn from them and grow from them, that's the way everything becomes better. I mean, everything you do becomes better. You become a stronger human being. You become a stronger worker. You become a more knowledgeable person. And I truly do believe art is growth. We do have to. The minute you stop growing, you no longer continue to be an artist. You might continue to be a craftsman. You might continue to do what you've done, but without growth, you can't do anything new or anything outside of the box, even if it's a box you've put yourself into.
Well, I mean, that is the definition of a growth mindset.
Yeah.
And I'm always enthusiastic to expose the artists that I coach to people with such a mindset. And I'll tell you why that's important to me. So Carol Dweck, I don't know if you know her, she's a scientist and she wrote a book called Mindset, and she defines mindset as a set of beliefs about what is possible in the world. That's simple. And Tom Bilyeu,
Amen on that, by the way.
yeah, man, Tom, not surprised you would feel that way. Tom Bilyeu is the genius behind Impact Theory University. He augments that a little and says it's a subset of beliefs around what you are capable of.
Well, I've always believed, I mean, you know this, I think, from our collaboration together, challenging yourself and challenging other people always causes the ship to rise, unless neither of you have a desire to be challenged. And you also know that, from Barter's kind of the theory of Barter, the thing that holds people back most is fear. And fear is always, we're just uncomfortable with the unknown, so we turn afraid of it. Well, there's nothing to be afraid of, because we're afraid of failure. Why be afraid of failure? You're going to fail at some point doing something at some time. And then you learn from that failure and you become a stronger, better person because of it. So there's no reason to fear failure. And if you don't feel fear of failure, then you have the capability of overcoming any other fears. And from you and I working together, you get 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 people together. If you all can collaborate and brainstorm and have the freedom to say what you need to say, in the end, you're going to come up with better decisions than any one of you can come up with alone. And in the end, in that process, everybody together will grow.
So do you think without that mindset, the desire and almost eagerness to grow and to learn and to communicate, do you think without that you'd be able to sustain this pace over 26 years?
No,
you know what I'm talking about.
I do. And I've worked with I haven't worked at, well, I have. I've worked with other artistic organizations and watched and monitored other artistic organizations who have a more corporate mindset and who are a little more bureaucratic. And the result of that is always disappointing because it frequently does not have the amount of creativity, the amount of energy, the amount of passion, and really the amount of artistry that it needs in order to elevate it into something spectacular. It instead just tends to be along a path and never reaches the mountaintop. I say it kind of stays on the ground and never flies.
There's a plaque at the doors on Main Street at Barter Theatre. Our Purpose Is, signed by Richard Rose, 1993.
Yep, I put that up my first year. Yeah.
The last paragraph. There's 4 paragraphs here, but the last paragraph says, "And ultimately to touch the hearts, to challenge the minds, and to reach the souls of all who enter Barter Theatre doors, young and old." So you've had this mindset and you've had these goals since the very beginning. And now you're still talking about these goals. And let me tell you where I'm going to hit you with some stats, because my contention is that the extraordinary thing that happened at Barter Theatre under your leadership is the enormous amount of work.
You say that
sustained.
From an enormous amount of work everybody has to do, or the enormous amount of work we did collectively. All of that is true.
I'm speaking of learning. I'm learning how to word things. My mouth
it's good.
works.
I love that. Enormous amount of work is true.
Well, enormous amount of productivity.
Yes.
By work, I mean artistic.
Yeah.
Work.
No, I agree with
artistic
you.
artwork. But still, over those 26 years, you and the artists that you assembled, the artists at Barter Theatre, maintained high value art. So, and in the 2018, now Barter Theatre and Robert Porterfield won a Tony in 1948 for their
Correct.
contributions to starting the regional theater movement.
In fact, yeah. In fact, the very first theater Tony ever given. Yes,
Yeah, the first, and you can't receive it twice, by the way.
that's correct.
And that was the very first. The next one, do you know when the next one was? 1978.
Yeah.
Arena Stage. So what I did was I pulled some numbers
Arena Stage, by the way, that used Barter as a model and hired a bunch of Barter actors to come help be their first company.
Is that right?
That is correct.
You know, this was a question I prepared for you about how Nina Vance in 1947 started the Alley Theater, Zelda Fitzchandler, first performance, Arena Stage, 1950.
Yep.
They're largely considered two of the founding forces behind the regional theater movement.
Yeah, if you exclude Barter and all the work Barter did.
Well, right. Barter
And
Theater's
Cleveland
first
Playhouse
performance was in 1932.
Yeah.
So they had to have had, and considering the fact that Barter received a Tony in 1948 for their contributions to the regional theater movement, they had to have had Barter. They had to have had Porterfield's model in their mind.
Well, Zelda certainly
case
did,
study.
because Zelda hired Barter actors. So, you know, Tyrone Guthrie did the same thing when he started the Guthrie Theater.
Is that right?
When he started the Guthrie Theater, he hired a bunch of Barter actors. And why? Because they knew repertory. They knew how to work together. He knew they knew how to be a company, and that was very important to him. So the same thing was true at the Guthrie in Minneapolis as well.
Wow. See, you learn something new every time you visit Richard Rose.
I mean, there's a great history there. There's no doubt. I mean, as I said, because Zelda turned to Barter actors, there's no doubt they knew of Barter's operation, and they knew of its impact on the regional theater movement.
Well, we'll get back to that in a second, because that's a very interesting path to go down. So what I did was I took some stats from other Tony Award winning theaters. So there'd be kind of equanimity in the numbers. So in 2018, 2019 season, the Alley Theater, I just pulled them off the website. The Alley Theater put up 10 shows. Goodman put up 9. Arena put up 9. Utah Shakespeare Festival, 10. Barter Theater, 22. In just the two spaces in Barter Players.
That's correct, yeah.
2017, 2018 season, Alley 10, Goodman 13, Arena 10, Utah Shakespeare Festival 8, Barter Theater 23. All right. And this is sustained throughout your career.
You know, because I've told you this, the old joke among the Lord theaters when I'd meet with our colleagues in Lord theaters was, we should just be publishing the shows we're not doing rather than publishing shows we are.
Well, those numbers are more in line with like a large performing arts center, like the Kennedy Center
we
or
used
Lincoln
to joke
Center.
that next to the Kennedy Center was the only place in the United States, maybe Lincoln Center and Kennedy, that did more performances a year than we did.
Wow. But how many employees did Barter?
Oh,
employ?
About a tenth of each one of those.
Yeah, well, almost,
and with a budget
little less
about,
than 200, right?
Yeah, and with a budget under 25, probably 25% or less to many of those theaters.
Well, God love you. I only was there for the last 5 years before COVID hit, and so I've witnessed it.
Yeah.
And so when you took over in 1992, there were Barter produced 18 shows with an average of 20,000 people in attendance.
No. Oh, in 1992, no. Their last year, they had 47,000 in attendance.
Oh, 47.
Yeah.
Okay. I like being corrected.
Yeah, it's okay. Because
No, I do.
I doubled that in my first year.
Okay.
I
Well,
went from 47 to 94,000 people.
Amber, according to Amber, who keeps these records between the years 2010 and 2019,
Yeah.
that attendance surged to 162,000 people
Yeah.
each year.
Yeah.
Where did 162,000 people come from?
all over the United
Southwest
States.
Virginia, no.
Not
Yeah.
that, well, none of them, even in early times. I mean, even in Bob's times, but or in Rex's times, and even Rex's last season, they came from largely from the southeast or the northeast, and some from the west. But basically, Barter has had kind of a national audience since its beginning. Uh, because I don't know if you know the old stories, but the trains from New York going west would stop in Abingdon overnight, and that was the primary source of patrons for Barter's early, other than locals, Barter's early audiences. Because that overnight stay, a lot of those people were from New York, and they would go to the theater. They would go to Barter Theater that evening, and then get back on the train in the morning.
That's interesting. There's a famous picture of the actors in front of a billboard.
Yeah. When they toured, I mean, the one thing Bob did do a lot is they toured every year. They toured all over the United States, including to Alaska a couple of years. And everywhere they went at those times, they would carry on the bus with them these big billboard signs that they would then put on the side of the road. They would literally put them up around the United States. So they had these free billboards all over the US.
That's cool, man.
I know.
That's
never got
awesome.
permission from anybody to do it. They just put them up.
Well, that's Barter Theater.
That is Barter Theater.
People would put, I read stories about people putting vegetables and pumpkins at the box office, and one live snake.
Snakes and snake skins. They got just about everything. My favorite one is one year there was it was a very wet summer, and they had gotten so many tomatoes that Bob Porterfield actually put out a statement and said, "We will accept no more tomatoes at the box office for the next several weeks."
Wow. That's good. No more tomatoes.
My favorite story is, one farmer literally pulled up to the theater with his cow on a trailer, and he milked the cow right there, and he brought it to the box office for his ticket. And the box office, this is a true story. The box office manager said, "Well, is your wife coming with you?" And he said, "Yeah, but she's got to milk her own ticket."
That's good.
Yeah. It's true story.
Okay. That's good. I never heard that.
Yeah.
But I'm fascinated with how Barter is able to sustain such a high volume of work while not getting burned out, while still maintaining a high commitment to the art.
Well,
so,
I'm not going to say nobody got burned out, but
okay.
but the number of people who have carried on at Barter for a long time indicates that burnout was not a huge problem for us. In some areas over others, it was a bigger problem. Sometimes, particularly in the scene shops, sometimes with musical directors, sometimes with sound, because as you know, the demand is high. But I think there's 2 or 3 reasons, just right off the cuff, that made this work. One is we had people with strong work ethic. 2, people felt their contribution to what we were doing was very important. So everybody understood that their role in it was very important. And 3 was, even though while I had the false reputation of being a bit of an autocrat, the reality was people knew they had a voice, and they knew that they would be listened to, and they knew that what they had to say was important. And even if we didn't always do what people suggested, we respected their suggestions. And I think that was important to a lot of people. And I can tell you a couple of quick stories, but one that I think really points to that is when colleagues used to come visit, and then I would take them on a tour of our facilities and how we operate, because everybody thought we had no right being in business, being where we were and how much work we were doing and everything. frequently as we were going through, somebody would stop me and say something or make some comment, one of the employees, or ask me a question or state an opinion. And frequently the colleagues, after the person, was no longer talking to us and we were moving on our way, would say to me, "You let people talk to you like that?" And I said, "Let them. I encourage them." I said, "I think if they have something to say it, and let's hear it." Because I said, I have found that some of the best suggestions of anything we have done in terms of solving a problem, something will come from, a wardrobe mistress or somebody backstage or one of the people, carpenters from the shop or the sound designer. Or, I mean, that from working with you, you've come up with some ideas of stuff that we did that was phenomenal that I would never have thought of doing or nobody else would ever have thought of doing. And that's the beauty of all that. And if that motivates people a long way to sticking with it, even when times get stressful or times get tough.
Well, I can vouch for that attitude. I remember I was in a rehearsal with a whole lot of people, and of course I made a joke, and had I been thinking, I would have not made that joke, and it was borderline offensive. And later out in the hall, we were talking about something, and I just made a remark like, "Yeah, if I could keep my mouth shut." And you looked at me and said, "Well, why would you want to do that?"
Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
Let me say one thing. We've over time at Barter used a lot of consultants for various things to help us with strategic planning, to help us with whatever it might be. And during that time, almost every one of the consultants we came in, whether they were consultants to help us with capital campaigns or strategic planning, always would look around and look at what we're doing because they had all worked with other Lord theaters or other big, entities or Fortune 500 companies, and they would say, "Well, you can't do what you're doing. You got to stop. It's not possible to maintain," and that would be their first things out of their mouth after they had done a tour. And then they'd be with us for 3 or 4 days. And without exception, especially the ones who knew theater, worked at other large theaters, would say, "You got to write a book about this. This is phenomenal. And I take back everything I said previous." And that happened consistently. One in particular, who was a guy I thought he's going to be tough to work with as a consultant because he really hates what we're doing and he doesn't think it's right. Was so bought in by the time he'd been there for 3 days. We worked with him for over a year. He just kept saying, "You got to write a book. You've got something going on here. Everybody needs to know about."
Is that a promise? I mean, that's a book I would read.
I didn't say I'm going to write a book. I'm not the person to write books for lots of reasons. But somebody needs to write a book. It's just not going to be me. I'll help them, but I'm not going to write it.
Okay. I'm not going to make any promises on tape. I'll tell you that.
I was hoping you would. But
cutting room floor.
I'll let you go. Yes, exactly right.
You were talking about some people getting burned out, but that's not the norm.
Well, no, it's not the norm.
There are people there that have been there longer than you. Greg the carpenter.
Greg was there before I was. Yeah.
Nick Piper was here before you.
Yeah, he went away for a little bit to go test New York out for a year or two, and then came back. But Nick's time there started before. Suzanne Boulay started before I did. A lot of people have been there a long time.
And Nick's wife is an actor at Barter.
Correct, Wendy.
And your wife.
They met at Barter, by the way.
Cool. Your wife, Amanda, is a choreographer and a costumer in her own right. And I've seen.
Yeah, we've worked together.
At least one show.
We were married long before we came down here, but we've worked together almost all of our 32 years, 34 years. And we've worked together that entire time.
And she's great. And
she is amazing. Yes.
There's Sean Campos and Ashley Campos. Ashley's killing it with the with her YouTube videos about the barter history.
Yeah.
By
Yeah.
killing it, I mean a good thing.
Yeah.
And Ashley is a company member, and she's a choreographer and a costumer, and they're married. And I don't know what percentage. It's got to be a high percentage of barter people. And the point I'm getting at, the question I'm getting to is that has got to affect their mindset. That has got to support the mission that the barter people have. We don't even call ourselves barter employees. We call ourselves barter people, barter family.
Yeah.
We refer to them as employees, like at company meetings or when we're having a budget meeting or something. But I mean, there's a barter Facebook page, barter family Facebook page that's very active, and it's just for people who are part of the family.
Well, we've always said that once you're a member of the Barter family, you're always a member of the Barter family. And like every good family, we have our ups and downs and problems and dysfunctionalities, but we also have our familiar family love for each other and respect and encouragement, and also I don't know how familiar you are with the book The Artistic Home. The Artistic Home was written and published by TCG, Theater Communications Group, back in I want to say maybe late 60s, early 70s. And it really was meant to be a model for the future of regional theater. The reality is most regional theater did not work hard enough on creating a home for its artists. Most regional theaters and their artistic directors were more concerned about getting a reputation for themselves or getting stuff into New York and so they could get on Broadway or anything but really their community totally. Zelda knew what community was all about, and so did a whole bunch of others over time. But for the most part, a lot of regional theaters just really failed to understand the artistic home. We actually created the artistic home. It was what it's all about. You want to have a place where you can live, where you can work, where you can be supported, where you can make a living, where you can raise a family, and where you can have a life along with being in the theater. And having a life along with being in the theater, as you well know from where you've worked, and I know from where I've worked, and everybody else knows in the theater, is rare. You can either work or have a life, but it's really hard to do both. And we wanted to give the opportunity. I mean, one of the real goals to set out here was to give the opportunity of people to do both. Doesn't mean they weren't going to work hard. John Hedges, who was a longtime resident company member and still a very good friend and quite a talented artist, used to say that we were the working class theater. And we were the working class theater because we worked harder than any other theater in the nation. And John had been around. He'd run a few, and so he knew from whence he was talking. And it was true that the price you pay for what we want to do is to be able to have your family and to have a family that can settle somewhere nice and wonderful, good place to live, making a decent wage and getting decent benefits. I mean, we're one of the few theaters in the nation, even among the very large theaters, that gave everybody health insurance, gave everybody access to 401k. So, we wanted to make sure we treated our people well, gave them a home, and gave them a place where they could feel confident working. As you know, our contracts were always about automatically renewable unless we set out, well in advance to let you know that we were not going to renew it, or unless the artist would set out in advance to let us know they were not going to continue the next year. And that's not heard of anywhere. Nobody gets automatically renewable contracts. So, from many respects, we were something unique all the way around.
Well, that artistic home that you talked about was had to have been a conscious decision.
Totally
And
conscious. That's when I
yeah,
got hired here, I set out very much to do that. I was already doing that in New Hampshire when I was at American Stage Festival. Yeah, I've believed in that all along.
people in the community, people of the community tend to support other people of the community. And then there is the old adage that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, right?
Interesting.
But you have 5 people or ideas, and you have, but looking from afar or looking from outside, it's sort of like you nurtured little entrepreneur, not little, but entrepreneurs in their own right. Katie Brown and the Barter Players, who's now the artistic director of Barter Theatre. Nick Piper with American Festival of Plays and Playwrights, College Playwrights Festival, and the Young Playwrights Festival, right? Is
Yes.
that right?
Yeah.
But everybody does more than one thing, and not because they're required to. Tricia Matthews is an acting coach, and she's the Shakespeare scholar, from what I understand. And is that right?
Carrie's more of a Shakespeare scholar, I think, than
That's
Tricia
true.
is. Yeah.
Carrie Lewis, who is a company member and married to Justin, by the way, who is also a company member.
And both of them met here as well.
Sean Campos has his physical training.
Yeah.
And he coaches people doing that. And
Yeah.
meanwhile, he's got 3 or 4 shows in his head. He's rehearsing to and performing to, and so it's almost like you
And
have
Zacchaeus
nurtured.
is the vocal coach.
That's right. And he's a
does
teacher.
a lot of vocal work and teaches. Yeah.
There's the I could go on and on, but I just wanted to give a sampling. What I was getting at is it's like you have nurtured artists to reach their full potential.
I would agree that's part of it. Part of it is looking at people's skills and opportunities and encouraging them to pursue all of the skills that they have rather than just a singular skill. And also then to share that with the rest of the community, which is part of the process as well. There are 2 ways of looking at this. One way, this is why I'm never writing a book, by the way. One way to look at it is to say, people would say, the reward for doing great work at Barter Theatre was you get more work.
Excellent.
You get more work to added to what you do. I think of it more like everybody has skills or specialties even beyond what they're doing for us. In other words, there may be specialties related to that, or there may be specialties not related to that. My one regret over time is we've had dancers and actors who are good dance teachers and good dance instructors as well. And I've always wanted to start a dance school at Barter Theatre. And in 2 or 3 cases, I had people that I think we were really moving to get that to happen, and then something would happen, and they either didn't stay, or something happened in their family, they had to leave, or they just felt they were too not willing to take the risk to start a dance studio with us, or whatever it might be. But at times, like everything, some of those risks are not going to pay off. You're going to start something, it doesn't work, and that's, at least you're trying. At least you're trying to give people the opportunity and to expand their creativity and expand their gifts and support that. And we've always supported it. And as I said, sometimes it doesn't work out, and sometimes it does. And when it works out, it's really glorious.
Yeah, man. Talk about reaching out and touching people's souls.
Yeah.
Arena Stage. I worked for Arena. I started working there the year after they dissolved their company.
Well, companies dissolved everywhere. Um, I was hoping we'd kind of talk about this because I have a really strong feeling about this. As you know, we in some ways are the only year-round residential acting company in the United States. Um, Arena Stage used to have an acting company. Guthrie used to have an acting company in old and newer times. Uh, Alabama Shakespeare had an acting company. Uh,
Steppenwolf?
Stephen Steppenwolf calls themselves an acting company. The reality is they're all just associates, and that means that people come back for shows every now and then.
Okay.
When I'm talking about acting company, I mean a group of actors that are working together constantly. In Steppenwolf's case, it's just, somebody will go off and then they'll come back and they become an associate company member, and they make it sound like they really have a company, but they don't. It's just not a company in the way I mean company. If you were at Alabama Shakespeare at Denver Center, you were there. You were there full time, the way Stratford does, or Oregon Shakespeare Festival does at Ashland. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of an acting company. A Milwaukee rep for years said they have a resident acting company. All that resident acting company really meant is they had 5 or 6 actors that they would promise about between 16 and 20, 22 or 24 work weeks a year. Well, that's not really a full-time job for an actor. It's half a year, and it's not really a full-time company working together, because those 5 or 6 actors might work at all different shows and never work together during the season, except for Christmas Carol. So we had a group of people that we were committing to on a year-round basis, from year to year to year to year. The reason that acting companies died. One of the, I believe, one of the greatest acting companies was Trinity Rep. Andre, when he ran Trinity Rep, well, he just ran one of the best. I think he had one of the best ensemble acting companies that I've seen, other than maybe ours. But he understood what I think a lot of other people don't understand about acting companies. When Trinity was at its height of its resident acting company, they would play butlers, they would play maids, they would play leads, they would play everything. So they weren't ever typed. The problem with acting companies is that a lot of them, you have your tiers. You have your first top tier actors, you have your second tertiary actors, and then you have your minor actors. And they might work their way up over time. But those tiers mean that every show that you went to, the same leads, people were saying as leads. So it somehow didn't really matter if you were watching a Shakespeare or a American classic, or every show looked the same because they were being acted the same by the same people. And that's where I say art equals growth. What happens a lot in those companies is that everything looked and felt the same, because you weren't seeing a great performances all the time, even if they were great actors, because they were playing the same stuff over and over again, the same types of characters in the same way. And like a lot of big movie stars, they get caught into that type. And the result is audiences get bored with them. And that's what happened with a lot of the resident acting companies, is audiences were just tired of it. And so instead of solving the problem, they just disband their acting company. That's what happened at Denver. It's what happened at Alabama Shakespeare. It's what happens at Kansas City Rep. It's what happened at the Guthrie. And that's unfortunate. The missed opportunity was they never did what we did. You never had somebody playing the roles that you've seen Sean play, or Andrew play, or Trisha Matthews play, and the great variety of stuff. Trisha was playing men and women. Andrew was playing men and women. Sean was playing men and women.
One of my first shows here is when Trisha played Scrooge.
Yes. So it's the philosophy is you've got to challenge people. We always said to the actors and people wanted to design, or whatever you do, we're going to challenge you to do something that you're going to fail at. uh, and that's okay. It's okay to fail, and know that you're not going to get punished for failing. We're going to back you, and we're going to help you, and we'll give you every resources. And this was true of me as well. I've directed shows over the year at Barter that were utter disasters. I mean, major failures, and it happens. Uh, and I used to kid about the fact that, when that would happen, I'd say, well, okay, if I were the producing artistic director, I'd fire me right now. um, but it's going to happen to everybody, and that's okay, as long as you can learn from it and recover from it, and it doesn't take you into a downward spiral. Um, and most people who are good workers will figure out how to get better as a result of it.
Wow, there are so many lessons in what you just said. You could have dissolved the company, but it all comes
And there was a
down
lot
to
of
the
pressure
art.
to do that. There's always, ever since I started the company, there was a lot of pressure to dissolve it. But what we did is our audience learned to love our company. I mean, they would love our company from top to bottom, and they would respect the company. And even if they watched a show that somebody was really outside, way outside their box performing, they still loved it, and they still had great respect for it, even if they didn't think the person was as good in that as they might have hoped. And the question, the success of it is we worked on getting that connection between our company and our community and the audience, and all that connection helped all of that grow and helped it all get better. I mean, I had an artistic associate come through one summer. It was really spring. She saw the spring rep. She was an associate at one of the associate directors at Oregon Shakespeare Festival. I had known her for many years. She didn't tell me she was here. She came and watched the full rep. She watched the 4 shows of our rep. And on the way out of town, she called me. And she called and said, "Oh, I just saw your shows." I said, "What the hell? Why didn't you?" She said, "Because I wanted to see them. I didn't want to be influenced by anything. I wanted to see what." And she said, "This is coming from somebody who works at Oregon Shakespeare Festival and worked there for years." She said, "I'm going to tell you something." She said, "If there's a better acting company and a better company all the way around anywhere else in the United States, I don't know where it is." And I thought, coming from that person who had that background was probably the highest compliment I've ever gotten.
Well, those of us who work at Barter already know that. And Barter's sort of like the best kept secret among highbrow
Oh, it is.
theater makers,
And why is that?
Yeah, why is that?
Because
Because
we're in the South. Because
you're in the South, you're not
we're in the
attached to a
South.
major city,
That's
you're not
correct.
attached to a major university, and you don't have a line item in the national budget like the Kennedy Center does.
That's correct. And it's really the southernness of this theater that really probably hurts us more than anything. I mean, Bob Porterfield had a great advantage when he started here. The New York Times and the Washington Post both had reporters here in Abingdon full time. Because there was all the coal stuff going on, all stuff going on in the coal fields, and they would all stay at the Martha Washington Inn in Abingdon, and they would never leave Abingdon, and they would report about the coal fields. But they also reviewed all of the shows. So every show that Bob did for the first 10 years was reviewed in the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's what made Gregory Peck famous. It's why Gregory Peck became famous, was because of the reviews he got here. And it made a lot of others famous as well. That was an advantage now. As you know, the Washington Post and the New York Times barely now review all the shows in Washington or all the shows in New York. But even for a long time, they stopped reviewing outside of their core region. So we don't have that advantage anymore, and you have competition from all of the regional theaters all over the United States, which are in big which are in big metropolitan areas, which we have a larger attendance of than many of those theaters, and yet we just have a hard time getting any kind of attention at all.
Well, I mean, back in 1932, how many regional theaters did the Washington Post have to cover?
Well, they didn't, and that's why it was so
Right.
special that they were here. So it was important. Yeah,
And that speaks to the enormity of what Robert Porterfield
absolutely.
did. So how did you come about, speaking of shows in rep, how did you, in 1992, Barter wasn't doing shows in rep. How did you come to that? How did you,
Barter
what went
never
into
really-
the decision?
Barter never really did shows of rep. They only did rep one time a year. During the Appalachian, during the Virginia Highlands Festival, Barter would bring back all of its in the early years from the 1930s, 40s, and into the early 50s. They would have companies, they would have 2 or 3 floating companies that performed here, and then they would go out on tour, and then they would come back and perform, and they would do that in rotating with the companies. But they weren't doing rotating rep on the stage. They were doing stock on the stage, except for that week in August, they would take and they would redo all of the shows they did during the summer in repertory. By repertory, really, I mean one night and then one another night and one another night, one another night, one another night. They really rep it. But that was the closest any Barter ever did to true repertory. I did true repertory for a couple of reasons. And it was where I was headed as I started to form the resident company anyway. I did it, number one, to make the company stronger, give more opportunity and be able to employ more people, but largely for marketing reasons. Think of it this way, Tony. If you are an audience member coming to Barter Theatre from Atlanta, and you're going to see one show or maybe 2 shows if you're doing one in each space. But they really weren't doing that before I took over. And you don't like the show that you've just seen, that you came from Atlanta to Abingdon to see, you're likely not coming back again. But if you come from Atlanta and you see 3 or 4 shows, and let's say you love one of them, you like one of them, and the other 2, you go, you're coming back because you love that one show, or because you've loved 1 or 2 of the shows, or because you've seen a couple of company members you really like and you want to see them again. This is what's kept Stratford going in Canada, and the Shaw Festival in Canada, and Oregon Shakespeare Festival going. So it becomes a important marketing and audience building tool, because repertory allows a better variety of experiences, the more likelihood that you're going to succeed, and an ability to reach a larger audience. Because if I'm doing just one kind of theater, then I'm pigeonholed into that audience. But if I can keep a variety of kind of things going, I'm more likely to get the avid theater goer, along with a larger audience that's going to be pleased because they get to see something they like, or along with some other stuff. So and it's a good teaching tool as well then, or a good experience building tool. So from all perspectives, repertory makes total sense. From even though economically it's more expensive, you can expand your audience because of it.
Again, there you go, reaching out to the souls of all who enter Barter Theatre.
Amen.
Like it says on the plaque. And you also seem to have a commitment to new work. For example, you support new adaptations and new plays, new adaptations like It's a Wonderful Life, A Christmas Carol, Modern Christmas Carol, new plays, a resident playwright, Kathy Bush. Some of the new plays is Dracula, The Three Musketeers, just for people who don't know, Friendly's Fire, which was amazing, Madam Buttermilk, Thicker Than Water.
Yeah.
Probably dozens of others. Was Keep on the Sunny Side original?
We commissioned it, yes. Jimmy Rogers, we commissioned a bunch of these things, a bunch of these works.
Why is it important to your mission?
Well, there are two things, or maybe three, Tony. First of all, I think it's wonderfully challenging and lots of fun as an artist to work on new work. And for the most part, so does most of our company. It has their challenges, and it makes it sometimes harder. Um, Secondly, I've always had a motto. We had T-shirts that we had made up that said, "We don't care how they did it in New York." So even if I was doing a show, a well-known title, we were going to do it in our own way. We're not going to do it in a way that everybody else does it. And thirdly, we are a Southern theater, and Southern plays, and particularly Appalachian plays, so Southern and Appalachian plays, are not frequently done anywhere in the United States. You know, New England and New York, and to some degree even Washington, turn their back on Southern culture. And Appalachian culture, nobody cares about. Really, I mean, except us. Once they get used to it, once they experience it, they love it. And we also had a lot of Southern audiences, and we had audiences who came to visit Appalachia, who were interested in Appalachia. And for us to do Appalachian works, the only way we're going to be able to do it is to create new works, because nobody was writing them, or there was no support for them. So Appalachian writers were writing other stuff. So we really gave a new life to Appalachian writers and to Southern writers. And then others followed suit as a result. Alabama Shakespeare Festival started a Southern Writers Festival after we started the Appalachian Play Festival. And a couple of other places started Southerns and Appalachian Writers Festivals as a result. So we were setting a tone for a part of the culture that the rest of the United States was kind of ignoring. There was a statement, Tony. I read an article in the Washington Post probably about 7 or 8 years ago now, that said about 45% of Americans could trace their roots through relatives or some point in Appalachia. So there's a lot more of the baseline of Appalachian culture throughout the United States than we really wanted to give it credit for. And so we felt that it was time to celebrate that and really let it be known that this culture, which formed our music, country music, which formed a lot of other cultural things that we take for granted, all came from Appalachia. It came from the Scotch Irish that settled here. It came from the Black population that settled here. It came from the other intermingling of groups that settled here. Have a core basis for all of American culture. And because it was Appalachia, because it was remote, because it was multicultural, because it was, for a long time, nobody cared, because it was Southern. And so the result is it was dismissed by the cultural elite, and so it never got the attention it deserved. So we felt that we needed to step out and really make that known and give it some opportunity it's not been given.
Isn't it risky?
Aren't new plays risky?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. I used to say that you can immediately decrease your audience by about 15% when you offer a new play versus at least a known work.
Due to what?
But
Due
to people don't want to take a risk. No, the people just they don't know. They you have no word of mouth, right? You don't have anything going on yet because they don't know what it is except what you tell them about it. And what you can show them, through any little clips or stuff that you can do, which in equity theater is harder to do than not. So it's an upward trajectory, and I don't care how much you prepare for a new work. if new works were always successful, every Broadway show would be a big hit. And they're putting a lot more time, money, and effort into it than we have the capability of doing. So it's never a guarantee that it's going to succeed. Um, and so where a known title, I mean, this is why Lord theaters do known titles. Known titles just have a tendency to to bring in an audience better and faster than you can with a new work. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do new work, and I don't think we do enough of it in the United States. But it's a resource problem and a funding problem. Fortunately, we've taken the risks, and it's done pretty well for us. We've done pretty well for new works with new works.
Had some huge successes, like
Yeah,
with
absolutely.
Friendly's Fire.
Yeah, and Sunnyside, and I mean, we toured Jimmy Rogers, we toured Civil War Voices, we toured. We've done some things nobody else has done.
You've done some controversial things too.
Absolutely. Doubting Thomas, which was before your time, but Doubting Thomas was a very powerful piece. We raised some interesting questions. We've had local government and other things change policies as a result of some of the shows we've done. It's impacted some of the ways government behaves in the region. So yeah, I mean, we've had successes.
Another show before my time is Liquid Moon.
Liquid
Moon, which
Moon.
apparently is legendary. So what was up with that show?
Well, Liquid Moon's legendary. It became legendary for one thing. That's it had male and female nudity in it. And so this religious group kind of protested in front of Barter Theatre, and they were holding signs saying naked is naked. Including that little girl holding a sign saying naked is naked. So the local news, the Bristol Herald Courier, local newspaper, did a photograph on the front cover on a Sunday, which was, I think, one of the most brilliant photographs I've ever seen. It was already starting to be a bit of a controversy, but they put on the front cover, we had the actors just wear shorts, wear gym shorts, and they shot their legs from the thighs down to the bare feet, and ran that with all four actors in a picture with just their legs showing, just their bare legs. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. By the way, it was nominated for a Pulitzer while it was here.
Really?
Yep, it was placed among. It became a finalist for the. It didn't win the Pulitzer, but it was nominated and became a finalist as a result of its production here.
Was it new work?
It was not the first. It was the second version of it. It had been done in a small theater in Chicago prior to us doing it. He rewrote it. John Green rewrote it, and then we did it here. We almost got it done in New York. We had Manhattan Theater Club and Roundabout both looking at it very, very carefully. They thought it was too controversial for them, which is hysterical.
Wow. Tell me what controversy does.
Well, the controversial
theater,
part of it was simply the
nudity
here. The beauty of the piece was, it was a piece after my heart because it's really about the core essence of religion, of the Christian religion. It's really about a discussion of, are we moving back to the Garden of Eden, or are we moving away from it? That was the core of it, but it was in a modern telling of these four people, and a very powerful piece. I mean, it really gripped our audience well. Let me say this about this. If you're going to do stuff like that, you got to do them for all the right reasons. It was all the right reasons. It was because it was a very, very poignant story for our audience. I mean, it really did touch them greatly. And secondly, the nudity was important. The story couldn't have been told without the nudity. And thirdly, it had a religious theme. I'll tell you two quick stories about it that I think are really important. One is, there's a counseling unit from the Episcopal Church in Asheville, just outside of Asheville. They really are counseling couples about sexuality who are having problems. The man who runs that operation came over to see the show, to see Liquid Moon. Now you have to understand something about Liquid Moon. Nobody left Liquid Moon and didn't talk about it for the next 6 hours. Some people stayed up all night talking about it. And I heard the story again and again and again and again from people. You couldn't watch it and not have a conversation about it. You had to. You simply had to. People were talking about it weeks later.
That's awesome.
But this counselor said to me, he came back and saw it a second time. He was bringing a couple of his people he was counseling with him at that time. And he stopped me afterwards and he said, look, he said, I've been doing couples counseling for 32 years. He said, this show did more to help my couples than any counseling I have ever given them. He said, I've been sending people to the show and they've come back and had a catharsis and a revelations that they never thought would be possible.
What's better than that?
Nothing. And it really helped. I mean, the number of people that this piece helped, I literally had volumes of letters and stuff.
I have that plaque right in front of me to touch the hearts, to challenge the minds, and to reach the souls of all who enter Barter Theatre.
There was one night, we held talkbacks every night after the show. We didn't do a single performance of this that we didn't do a talkback because we knew it was now controversial and we wanted people to talk about it and we wanted people to be able to ask questions. And we also knew that once they saw it, people were really moved by it and talking. And so they really wanted to discuss it anyway. And literally almost the whole audience would stay every night. And we sold this piece out across the board. But one night there was a gentleman, a younger gentleman, I'd say he's probably in his early 30s. In every way, you would identify him as a quintessential cliche Appalachian hillbilly. From the beard that he had to the way that he talked to the way that you'd say he was a hillbilly all the way. And he just stopped me and said, "Can I talk to you?" And I said, "Sure." I said, "Did you not like the piece? Did you not?" And the first thing he said was, he said, "Look," he said, "I'm a Southern Baptist preacher." He said, "I've got a little congregation of about 30, 40 families. We have a little church out in a holler about 20 miles from Abingdon." He said, "If I could send everybody from my church to see this piece, I would, because it would help them more than anything." And this was after the Southern Baptist Conference had condemned the show without even seeing it. They had condemned us for doing the show. So I said to him, I said, so why did you come see it? Because I knew the Southern Baptist Conference had forbid it and condemned it. And he said, "Because I wanted to see for myself." And that was the way this piece was. I probably wrote over 250 letters, individual letters, to people complaining about it, to people who are trying to whip up controversy. I talked to every legislative member from the Virginia legislature. I think all of whom were like, "You can't do this. You got to pull it off." I'm like, I'm not. The important part of this show for Barter was that it probably did more. Well, it did more to help the growth of our theater than anything. We suddenly took on an importance and a legitimacy that we never had, and our donations went way up. And we had a lot of people that were interested in helping the theater and being part of the theater that were previously ignoring all of us, ignoring Barter. So from a lot of perspectives, it was a very transformative show for our theater in every way.
Do you seek to be relevant?
We always seek to be relevant. I mean, I don't say that to toot our
Sure,
own
in
horn.
today's social media days, being relevant, that has a different meaning. But
I know, but nonetheless, we always meant to connect with our community, connect with our culture, and connect with our base audience as well as new audiences in ways that that other theaters, I think, really wish they could. And I'm bragging a little bit in saying that. I'll tell you this story because I think it's a good story as well. This is about. This must have been about the summer of 2018, maybe 2017 or 18. There was a couple that stopped me at intermission and said, "Can we talk to you after the show?" And so I said, "Sure, I'll come back." I was not planning on being there, but sure, I'll come back and have a conversation with you. So I came back after the show, and I said, "Just meet me in the lobby." And they met me in the lobby, and this guy said, "Well, we're from Washington, D.C." And I said, "Oh, so did you not enjoy the show?" Or and he said, No. He said, we've been coming for the last 4 or 5 years. He said, but what I want to tell you is this. He said, I know you think I'm going to tell you that the reason we love coming here is because, we love the way that you do shows. And he said, that's true, but that's not the real reason we love coming here. He said, now, first of all, it is our goal to try to see every major regional theater in the United States. He said they had just gotten back that summer from the Goodman and the Guthrie. They had been to the Goodman in Chicago, the Guthrie in Minneapolis. And they had already been in many other places, but they were trying to see every major regional theater in the country. He said, we came here about 6 years ago, never stopped coming back from DC. He said, we come 3 or 4 times a year. He said, but the reason we really love to come here is because of your audience. And he said, your audience loves being here and loves coming to your shows more than any other audience that we have ever been in anywhere else in the United States. He said, they like you, they like the work, they like each other, they welcome other people in, they take a sense of pride about it, but most of all, they connect with the theater in ways that we just wish everybody else understood. And I thought that was a huge, huge compliment.
It really is, because when you work your ass off for 26 years in order to achieve goals like to add insight to hidden and bring depth to obvious through images and visual stimulation, I mean, that's affirmation that you're doing something right.
Agree. I mean, it shows what you're doing is important.
And by the way, Washington, D.C. isn't the furthest place people come from to see Barter.
Not by any long shot. We have hit all 50 states almost every year for my last 20 years there. But we have also hit a lot of. We came one year close to hitting like 60% of the countries in the world.
I believe you.
This includes Madagascar and all of the kind of very obscure countries that you don't think of ever seeing anybody from in the United States.
You greeted the audience at just about every performance. Now Katie Brown does too. And one of the questions you ask is, who's the farthest?
Who comes from the farthest?
Who traveled from the farthest distance? And I want to say, somebody would say a country, and either you are really good at geography or really good at faking it.
No, I'm good at geography. Katie Brown doesn't have that skill, but I am really good at geography. In fact, I've had people with the audience argue with me about. They said, "No, I'm from the farthest distance," and I said, I'll say, I'm telling you, you're not. And I'd go check it out. And indeed, I'd be right.
But you often end up giving them both.
Absolutely.
The
prizes,
door prize. So I have one more Question for you. We talked about the regional theater movement. It was the little theater movement that turned into the regional theater movement. The regional theater movement's goals when they first started was to highlight the intrinsic artistic value of theater in contrast to what was going on in New York in the commercial district. The regional theater goals were expression of individualism, social issues. A lot of critics nowadays, though, are saying that regional theater, 70 years later, is now becoming more like the highly commercialized theater in New York. Working in the theater with a lot of different people, getting a show to get to Broadway is a huge deal for a regional theater. What do you think? Barter's commitment has always been to the art.
Barter's commitment has always been to its community. And I mean, that Bob Porterfield was known for that, which is why the community endeared themselves to Bob in ways that frequently doesn't happen with other theaters. So that connection, that's the mistake I think that people made. They made it, I don't want to say this in a way that sounds this negative. They make it too much about the art and not about the art for the community or within the community. And across the nation, they've always been striving to get a show on Broadway. That's what they want. They want the glory of getting a show on Broadway. And for years it was, you got a show on Broadway and then therefore you got the Tony Award for the regional theater because your show was on Broadway. Which I thought that was never about. And some of my favorite artistic directors from regional theater all understood that it wasn't about getting shows to Broadway. It was about getting shows that your community loved and embraced. So there is that about regional theater movements. The problem now is boards of directors have made it all about getting a show to Broadway. And then when they don't, they've fired the artistic directors. Or when they did a show that they thought was going to get on Broadway and it failed and it cost the theater a lot of money, they fired the artistic director. When in reality, it's the boards putting pressure on making that happen because they want the glory or the pomp and circumstance or the connection that goes with. And too many artistic directors have been hired because they say, oh, I can get you a show on Broadway. And so the board believe them, and then they end up putting the theaters in dire financial straits. So it's a bad motivation. You've got to do theater for your community, for your region, for your people, not because you want somebody in New York to go see it. Because I would say frequently, people would say, oh, you should take that to New York. And I say, this show would absolutely fail in New York, either the way we just did it or the show itself, because the New York audience, that's not what they're looking for. It's a little different now, Tony. I in the last 5 to 7 to 10 years in New York, we're seeing better storytelling in New York. I'm not going to take credit for it, but we were the first theater to start saying the story is everything. The story. Then people started using our mottos. Other regional theaters started using our whole messaging about stories, and it started to become a thing in the United States. Oh, let's tell good stories. What a novel thought! Because for years it was about spectacle in New York, and so it's not that anymore. I mean, if you're looking at Dear Evan Hansen and Hamilton and a whole bunch of Come From Away and a whole bunch of other things that have happened in the last several years, there's some really fine theater going on in New York now. I mean, really, really good theater. There's some other crap that went with it that's spectacle and doesn't. But people were rejecting that kind of stuff and really going for those that had better stories and made better connections. And people are looking for connections, and they're looking for theater to give them connection because that's what theater does. And I think New York has found that once again. Uh, regional theaters, regional theaters are too busy trying to make names for themselves so that their donors are happy and so that their boards are happy, and they've lost their motivation to do what they're supposed to do.
Well, speaking of connections, you just
And by the
kind of
way, I've
touched
just
on it.
offended every regional theater out there by accident. So when this gets aired, they'll all be pissed off at me. But there's a truth in it. And some of these regional theaters are excellent about connecting to.
Well, I mean, if there's anything you want me to not include,
No, don't worry about
tell
it.
me now.
I don't worry about it.
happy.
I say what I say, and I am what I am, and I don't take any of it back.
Truth. Well, I really want to hear what you have to say about, you talked a little bit about the connection. What is the connection then, if you were to put it in words, between art and the community?
Well, it's that ability. I mean, we all know that theater's ability is about, as you said in the plaque saying, is about touching the soul, really. I mean, it really is. We have a capability to do what almost nobody else can do. Um, Ballet will touch the soul in a different way, and music will, symphonies will touch the soul, and opera. Well, I don't know what opera does, but no, an opera will cause you to soar. It really will cause you to soar.
It'll
But
cause a
theater-
sore somewhere if you
That's
sit there
correct.
long enough.
Theater, on the other hand, has the ability to really transform, and it has its toll to really kick up reaction. I always recite to point to Playboy of the Western World. When Playboy of the Western World was first performed in Ireland, it caused a riot the first night of the performance. It literally caused a riot in the streets after the show. What was that riot about? The word shift had been said on stage. Shift had been said at petticoat, had been said on stage for the first time. And that was enough to cause a riot in Ireland.
Wow.
And
well,
that's how
you know,
transformative the theater is. And that's why cultures and countries that are autocratic really control their theaters. They don't want to let theaters touch audiences or change minds or cause people to think about things in ways that are way better and way more transformative than anything else can do. I've always said this: we can do things that churches can't do, and that politicians can't do, and that even universities can't do. And that's because we're not bound by all the political restrictions, religious restrictions, or intellectual restrictions that each of those entities are taking. We have the freedom to take our messages and put them in a form that people can react to and talk about and have discourse about in ways that almost nothing else can do.
thank you very much. That
Well,
was
thank you.
really interesting.
This is awesome. I think the idea is awesome, Tony, and I think this is going to be quite a wonderful thing.